Here at T, we spend a good deal of time discussing people we admire: fashion designers, artists, writers, architects, chefs, and performers of all kinds. Some are notable because they produce works of art that land at the exact right moment in the culture, that seem to not just speak to, but articulate, the global mood. Some are notable because they make art that has proven itself timeless, things or ideas in which every successive generation can find some echo of itself. As I've gotten older, however, the artists I find most mysterious and therefore compelling are the prophets, the people who have had to wait for the culture to catch up to them. People like Margaret Atwood, whose novel The Handmaid's Tale, while certainly acclaimed upon its publication in 1985, was also dismissed in some quarters as a fevered fantasy, though no longer. Or Kengo Kuma, the Japanese architect who was making buildings that were deliberately humble in both size and material. Kuma prefers to use cedar, a staple of pre-war Japanese structures, through decades in which architecture and its critics tended to favor technologically wrought spectacles. Kuma, however, had foreseen a time in which architecture would have to answer, somehow, to the realities of diminishing resources and overstuffed cities, a time when architects would seek not to change the landscape, but integrate themselves into it. Our story on Kuma will go live on February 15. Then there's our cover star, Judy Chicago, a medium and genre-defying artist who, at 78, is and will be the subject of a number of major solo gallery and museum shows over the next 18 months. The past year saw her most celebrated work, the monumental, in all senses, The Dinner Party, 1979, a Volvic-inspired table with ceramic plates for 39 women from across the centuries, from Sappho to Virginia Woolf, become a pop-cultural touchstone, a visual shorthand for women's exclusion from the annals of history and a revisionist fantasy. Here, literally, was their place at the table. For Chicago, who has spent almost 40 years watching her creation be, alternately, reviled, praised, sneered at, ignored and celebrated, the work's triumph is a relief. From its conception, she told writer Sasha Weiss, she knew it needed to be permanently housed, because if it hadn't been, it would have simply reiterated the story of erasure it recounts. The work now has a permanent home physically, and in the annals of art and feminism at the Brooklyn Museum. Still, Chicago admits, I had no idea it was going to take this long. Words that resonate for many of us, in many ways. If you are an artist, there is nothing sweeter than having your art be seen, discussed, debated and, ultimately, appreciated. One could argue that it doesn't matter when that appreciation comes. For most artists, it never arrives at all. And yet, being a cultural Cassandra, being possessed of what Weiss characterizes as Chicago's lonely clairvoyance, is a difficult and often isolating role. Getting to say "I told you so" is little reward for what can be decades of ignominy, if not outright ridicule. Playing outside the club and in the art world, being female or a person of color has more or less guaranteed you'll probably be far outside. Requires a special kind of determination, powered by one's strength of conviction and singular vision, as well as the rare gift, sometimes natural, sometimes born from necessity, not to seek or crave validation, or, at least, to convince yourself you won't and don't. One of Chicago's own struggles was redefining what art should look like. And for all the challenges of our current era, we are collectively lucky to live in an age in which those definitions, and those dictating what an artist looks like, for that matter, are changing. Not fast enough, perhaps, not soon enough. I had no idea it was going to take this long, but changing nonetheless. The same can be said of beauty, generally. This issue is a celebration of all the different ways beauty is expressed and manifested, and all the different faces it wears. That redefinition begins with our cover, which, along with Chicago, features two other beautiful people, the Dominican-American model Delone, whom I love for her coldish, spunky grace, and the model I came into adulthood admiring, Jenny Shimizu. If you are an Asian American of a certain age, then the Japanese-American Shimizu's arrival on the scene via a now iconic 1994 CK1 ad was a jolt, and a promise. What we didn't know was that it would be an unacceptable number of years until we'd once again see an Asian face in a major ad campaign. As image makers, our job is to make sure that with every month, our definition of beauty gets a little more expansive. Because no one who's had to fight so hard for a seat at the table should ever feel they might lose it by just standing up.